Welcome, and thank you for standing by. All participants are in a listen-only mode for the duration of today's conference. Today's call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to your host, Megan Mori. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you, Anthony, and welcome to all of our attendees. Our webinar today is an update on our 2020 Census data products. I'm Megan Mori. I'm a senior advisor here at the Census Bureau, and I'm joined today by a number of my colleagues, including my fellow presenters, Jason, Cynthia, Nicholas, and Rachel, as well as a number of other experts from our disclosure avoidance team, like Shelley, Matt, Alexandra, and Dee, who will be here to answer questions throughout the presentation today. Today's webinar is the latest in our disclosure avoidance webinar series, which is just one component of our broader efforts to ensure that our stakeholders are as informed as possible about the tools we're using to protect the confidentiality of respondents in publications of our 2020 census data. We're excited to cover two major themes today. First, we'll have a quick level-setting review of our data products and our engagement plans and timelines. And then second, we'll take a deeper dive on our detailed race and ethnicity and American Indian Tribe and Alaskan Native Village population data. Along the way, we'll try to answer whatever questions you have. You'll notice that there's a Q&A feature where you can enter questions throughout today's presentation. Our subject matter experts will try to answer those as we go along, and as time allows, we'll try to wrap up today's presentations with a quick Q&A session as well. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleagues, Jason and Cynthia, to start us out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan. I'm Jason Devine. I work in the Population Division of the Census Bureau, and my colleagues, Cynthia and I, are going to be presenting to you today on the 2020 Census data products and our stakeholder engagement plans. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. Next slide, please. I'll start out with a little bit of background information. As most of us probably know, the 2020 Census apportionment and redistricting data have already been released. The timeline for the development and release of the demographic and housing characteristics file was impacted by splitting the development of the disclosure avoidance system for the redistricting data from the disclosure avoidance system for the DHC. That's an important point, and it helps us understand where we're at in our work today. Use cases and data accuracy will be considered in decisions about the demographic and geographic detail included in the DHC and detailed DHC. Consistency between the redistricting and DHC data continues to be included in the design of the disclosure avoidance system. Development work on the disclosure avoidance system was further split between the DHC and detailed DHC, and we will talk about that a little bit as we go through our presentation. And even though both approaches would be based on differential privacy, the DHC and detailed DHC will be protected using different sets of algorithms. The 2020 Census Data Product Planning Crosswalk provides information on the tables currently planned for inclusion in the DHC and detailed DHC. Next slide. I'm now going to go through some of the products that we'll be talking about today. As I mentioned, the redistricting file has already been released. The redistricting file supports Public Law 94-171, which directs the Census Bureau to provide data to the governors and legislative leadership in each of the 50 states for redistricting purposes. This product was the first file released that included demographic and housing characteristics about detailed geographic areas. Subjects included voting age population, population by race, population by Hispanic or Latino origin, occupancy status, and the reporter's population by major GQ type. These subjects, these tables, were all released at the census block level, the lowest level of geography the Census Bureau releases data for. And this product was released on August 12th. Next slide. This brings us to the demographic profile. This product is intended to provide critical demographic and housing characteristics about local communities from selected DHC tables in a streamlined, easy-to-use format as soon after the release of the redistricting product as possible. Subjects will include 5-year age groups, sex, race, Hispanic or Latino origin, household type, relationship to householder, the group quarters population, housing occupancy, and housing tenure. And the lowest level of geography would be at the place and minor civil division level. And we will talk a little bit later about how we are looking at the timing of the release of the demographic profile and how we might be able to release data sooner if we combine the release of the demographic profile with the release of the demographic and housing characteristics file, which is on the next slide. So next slide, please. So the demographic and housing characteristics file, or the DHC as I've been referring to it, will include many of the demographic and housing tables previously included in Summary File 1. These subjects include age, sex, race, Hispanic or Latino origin, household type, family type, relationship to householder. Some of these subjects will be provided for major OMB race and ethnicity groups, the group quarters population, housing occupancy, and housing tenure. And I mentioned the 2020 Data Products Planning Crosswalk. That file, that document provides more information about these tables and how these subjects are provided through this product. It provides information about exactly what would be in the tables, both in the demographic profiles and the DHC. For the DHC, the lowest level of geography will vary, with many subjects proposed to be available at the census block level. An important note is the DHC will not include tables that provide counts by detailed race, Hispanic origin, tribes, and population counts by household and family types. These will be included in the detailed demographic and housing characteristics file, which we talk about on the next slide. So next slide, please. The detailed demographic and housing characteristics file, or the detailed DHC, will include some tables iterated by detailed race, ethnicity, and American Indian Alaska Native tribes and villages in the 2010 Summary File 2 and the American Indian Alaska Native Summary File. It will also include some complex person and household join tables from the 2010 Summary File 1 file, and Rachel and Nicholas will talk about this product a little later. Subjects will include total population, sex by age for selected age categories, household type, housing tenure, average household and family size, population by family type and tenure, and population by household type and relationship. Also, tables by own children by family type and average household size by tenure. And here, for geography, it will vary, with many tables proposed at the county level and for American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian areas. Next slide, please. There's some potential changes that are being considered for the DHC file. We wanted to mention them here today to make sure data users knew these were being considered, so you could help us understand the potential implications. First, we're considering limiting the DHC tables to census tracts and above. We're also considering producing protected DHC tables directly without producing the underlying protected microdata. And I'll note that the design of the detailed DHC already does not include the production of microdata. And as I mentioned, we're also revisiting the timing of the release of the demographic profile relative to the DHC and the contents of the demographic profile. Next slide, please. There's some implications and benefits of producing the protected DHC tables directly without the underlying protected microdata. Potentially would result in increased accuracy in the DHC tables. So if we don't have to produce and protect the underlying microdata, we can allocate privacy budget to those other tables and potentially produce more accurate tables at the higher levels of geography. It may also allow us to release the DHC data sooner. The demonstration products, though, would be in the form of tables instead of privacy-protected microdata files. And the demonstration products I'm referring to here would be similar to the products that were released as part of the redistricting product effort, where we released demonstration products to let data users see the level of accuracy we were able to obtain with our disclosure avoidance system prior to the release of the actual product. If we didn't produce the underlying microdata, potentially have less or no consistency within the DHC tables, and potentially less or no consistency between the redistricting data and the DHC tables. So without producing the microdata, it makes it harder to maintain consistency both within the DHC tables and between the DHC tables and the redistricting data that's already been released. And it may impact the availability of the DHC data in other products, such as the PUM file and special tabulations. Next slide, please. Now I'll turn it over to Cynthia, who will talk about our engagement plans and some of the ways you can provide feedback to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the importance of stakeholder engagement and walk through our current engagement plan for finalizing the DHC. The process of producing the redistricting data has really been informative. It highlighted how critical stakeholder and data user engagement is to the process. There were two major lessons learned or takeaways from this process. The first is that a successful engagement requires both teaching and learning. We've been educating our stakeholders and data users every step of the way about what differential privacy is, why we've adopted it, and how the implementation of the DAS's top-down algorithm actually works. We presented at conferences and meetings, released videos, blogs, newsletters, technical papers, and conducted several webinars included in this webinar series, as well as updated our web pages to access this information. Most recently, we released the first differential privacy handbook titled Disclosure Avoidance for the 2020 Census and Introduction. This handbook was developed in partnership with the Population Reference Bureau, and our hope is that the data user community finds this handbook helpful in understanding differential privacy implementation to the 2020 census, specifically for the redistricting data. To that point, we would love to hear your feedback and thoughts about its usefulness as we prepare work on future handbooks. But I also want to circle back to my successful engagement point. We also acknowledge successful implementation of the DAS's top-down algorithm required us educating ourselves about how the data are used and for what purposes. This involved interacting with our data user and stakeholder community to gather critical feedback about their specific use cases. The second big lessons learned or takeaway was the importance of producing demonstration data and metrics to allow for the independent assessments of the data's fitness for use. That is, we ran the 2010 census data through the 2020 Census Disclosure Avoidance System, the top-down algorithm, to produce statistics that were comparable to the published 2010 census tabulations. This provided a way for independent analyses about how effective the algorithm was at preserving the data's usefulness for various purposes. So for the demographic and housing characteristics data product, we plan to use a similar process. That is, continue the education efforts, gather feedback from and listen to our data users, and then demonstrate how we might implement the disclosure avoidance for the DHC product. Noting the first of these user feedback activities began with the crosswalk review that has been ongoing since September, mid-September. I'll circle back to Jason in just a bit where he will provide a summary of the feedback that we've received. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the next two slides, I want to outline our activities for completing the DHC development, and then it would move us into our production. Now keep in mind, this is currently a notional timeline, so it should be used as a guide. Dates are not final and will be refined as we move through this process. Throughout, however, feedback from the data user community is going to be absolutely critical. So as shown, now through this month, December, we have been collecting and assessing feedback on the potential changes to the DHC tables, and Jason touched on some. This feedback is really important and is going to help us improve the configuration and testing of the DAS. As we confirm the important DHC use cases, that will then move us into developing some demonstration data that we could publicly release for evaluation. Our expected release of that first demonstration data product is this upcoming winter 2022. I always want to point out, however, that during this feedback period, we will stop, reassess, determine what changes need to be made, and communicate the status to ensure that we are being transparent about our processes. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in the spring of 2022, after we receive feedback of that first set of demonstration data and have been able to understand from the data user perspective their analysis of fitness for use, we'll continue tuning the DAS algorithm and will then produce and release a second set of demonstration data. With this release, a public workshop will be planned. This public workshop will be very similar in nature to our very first workshop managed by CNSTAT back in December 2019. This workshop will allow both Census Bureau and external data users to present their analyses and assessments of the data's fitness for use. This again is that critical feedback loop for us as we move to setting the final parameters for the DAS top-down algorithm. That is, this feedback will help inform the Census Bureau's Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee, or DSEP, when making the final decisions about the privacy loss budget to be assigned for the production run of the demographic and housing characteristics file, and how that privacy loss budget should be allocated across the various components of the file. Then, in the summer of 2022, the actual production run of the DHC will begin, and that is with the DAS top-down algorithm producing the privacy-protected microdata file that we will use to tabulate the DHC product. Note, this production date does not entail the activities of tabulating, reviewing, and disseminating that data product to the public. So I want you to be cautious that this timeline does not reflect the DHC release schedule. With our primary focus right now on the demonstration data phase of the schedule, we do, however, continue our efforts on the production of the full DHC schedule. And once we finalize that, we will notify and post that. Next slide, please. So this is a graphical representation of the timeline I just walked you through. And this, in fact, has been highlighted on our website. What I want to showcase here are the DSEP decision points for assigning the privacy loss budget for both demonstration data products, as well as for that production run. Next slide, please. On this slide, I'm providing some useful links to assist with learning more about the 2020 Census data products and the disclosure avoidance system. The first link provides info about the status of the 2020 Census data products, which also includes the link to the crosswalk that we've been talking about. The second link takes you directly to the recorded webinar that provides a step-by-step walkthrough of that crosswalk. The next link takes you directly to our recently released handbook. And the last link takes you to the newly redesigned Disclosure Avoidance Modernization page, where you can find a wealth of information about the differential privacy implementation plans for the 2020 census. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jason to provide an overview of the DHC crosswalk feedback that we've received. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. We do have a slide here that just shows a screenshot of our Disclosure Avoidance Modernization webpage. The previous slide included a link to this page, but an easy way to get to this page is just go to the Census Bureau's main webpage, and in the search bar, type in Disclosure Avoidance, and it'll take you to a page where the first link will bring you to our Disclosure Avoidance Modernization page. And there really is quite a bit of information on this page that will help you understand the work we've done up to this point and our plans for moving forward. Next slide, please. So from our most recent solicitation for input, we received 360 comments, with 175 of those including use cases or examples of how the data are used. Comments received in response to the 2018 FRN and from our most recent call for input on the 2020 Census Data Product Planning Crosswalk support the tables proposed for the 2020 Census Data Products, and the comments received document legal, programmatic, and other needs for census data at low levels of geography. And I want to be sure that you know that we recognize that because of where we are with the development of our disclosure avoidance system for the DHC and detailed DHC, that we're taking the time to examine the comments received and doing additional research when it is needed so that we can see where we have documented use cases and they're not meeting data user needs, so that any decisions made to alter what we are currently proposing for the crosswalk will be informed by the feedback we have received throughout this effort. Some needs were met with the redistricting data release. Others will be met with the proposed tables in the DHC and detailed DHC, but others will not. Uses that require basic demographic and housing information, age, sex, ethnicity, race, tenure as in rented or owned, and housing counts by characteristics of the household or family will be broadly met by the tables already proposed for inclusion in the DHC, with the exception of some uses at lower levels of geography, where the tables are now planned to only be available at the county level. These are mainly tables that present counts of households by household or family type, and with the availability of age and sex data for both the household and group quarters population. We're also, though, hearing from a number of data users who are saying for some topics, we should save the privacy loss budget at the lower levels and focus on the city or municipality level. So we are reviewing the comments to see where changes to the tables proposed in the planning crosswalk will allow us to better meet data user needs, and we're still accepting comments in the detailed DHC through December 18th. Tables proposed for inclusion in the detailed DHC, such as tables for detailed race and ethnicity groups, American Indian, Alaska Native tribes, are planned to be provided at the county and American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian areas, but we will likely not meet the needs of the use cases we receive that require these data at lower levels of geography with the proposed geographies alone. The same may be true for some of the tables that include counts of people by characteristics of their household or family from the detailed DHC, although the geography for these tables has not yet been determined. So we will continue to review and use the submitted comments to inform decisions as we work towards finalizing the 2020 Census Data Products. Thank you. I believe the next slide provides the email address where you can send comments. So there you go. And with that, I will turn it back over to Megan, who can move us to the next presentation. Thank you.
Megan, you got to unmute.
Oh, so sorry about that. Thank you so much. I was just saying that was very informative. We really appreciate those presentations. I've noticed that some questions have come in for you two in the Q&A feature, and I know Jason and Cynthia will start answering those as we turn it over to Nicholas and Rachel for our second component of today. Take it away.
Thank you, Megan, and thanks, Jason and Cynthia. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. So I'm Rachel Marks, and I'm Chief of the Racial Statistics Branch here at the Census Bureau. And Nicholas and I are really pleased to talk with you today about the Census Bureau's work to develop the 2020 Census Data Products for detailed racial and ethnic groups and American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages.
Thanks, Rachel. And again, thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Nicholas Jones, Director of Race, Ethnicity Research and Outreach in our Population Division. Last year, Rachel and I and our colleagues in the Demographic Directorate at the Census Bureau explored ways to balance the need for accurate statistics while protecting respondents' privacy in order to develop a proposal for producing 2020 census data for detailed race and ethnicity groups and American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages and their demographic characteristics in the decennial census.
The Census Bureau has a long history of tabulating statistics for detailed race and ethnic groups and protecting information provided by respondents. And over the decades, more and more granular census data have been published. But advances in data science, more powerful computers, and externally accessible big data has increased the risk of identifying individuals from published statistics. So to mitigate this risk, the Census Bureau is implementing new disclosure avoidance methods in the 2020 census. For the 2020 detailed DHC data products, we're developing differentially private disclosure avoidance system in conjunction with experts from Tumult Labs. The main reason we had to develop a separate system was that the constraints for Group 1 data products, that statistics be tabulated from microdata and that it be operated on the cells of the publication, were simply unviable for the detailed race and ethnicity data products. Those requirements are completely broken when we need to produce data for the thousands of detailed population groups. So we relaxed the requirements, and the biggest need was for our demographic directorate subject matter experts to examine use cases and consider the privacy and accuracy balance to find ways to produce the detailed statistics needed with these hard trade-offs. The 2020 census data products that we refer to as the detailed DHC data products include tables on detailed racial populations, detailed Hispanic populations, and specific American Indian tribes and Alaska Native villages, as well as the basic demographic and housing characteristics for these groups, such as sex and age, household and family type, and tenure. Stakeholder feedback, combined with the Census Bureau's review of table access rates and subject matter knowledge, informed the development of the detailed DHC data product. Our proposal for producing 2020 census detailed race and ethnicity group population counts and characteristics data focuses on tables that have been developed in an attempt to balance the programmatic, legal, and statistical needs of data users and stakeholders while protecting respondents' privacy. From the 2020 census results, we're planning to produce data for more detailed race and ethnic groups than ever before, but at many fewer geographic levels, as well as fewer and less detailed tables while balancing accuracy and privacy. In the spring of 2020, our team was introduced to Group 2 differential privacy work and a team of researchers from Tumult Labs. We worked with Tumult for several months to develop analytical tools for evaluating privacy and accuracy and producing detailed racial and ethnic statistics. Throughout the summer of 2020 and into the fall, our researchers evaluated data from the 2010 census to explore how best to achieve this balance of privacy and accuracy to produce racial and ethnic statistics and characteristics of sex and age for these groups. In the fall of 2020, our team presented a proposal and recommendation to the Census Bureau's leadership for producing total detailed racial and ethnic group population counts and sex by age statistics. The Census Bureau's DSEP provided initial approval for the demo parameters and epsilon levels. And then in the winter through summer of 2021, we needed to put this work on hold in order to review the 2020 census data files to produce apportionment and redistricting data products. Our demographic directorate researchers worked with Tumult Labs experts last year to utilize a Tumult Labs tool called SafeText. And this tool allows us to assess the interaction and balance of privacy and accuracy for producing detailed race and ethnicity data from the 2020 census. This research explored ways in which privacy and accuracy levels can be set to produce statistics on thousands of detailed racial and ethnic groups of various sizes, geographic distributions, and their basic demographic characteristics of sex and age. SafeText is an Excel spreadsheet which relies on mathematical formulas and public 2010 detailed race data to approximate the differential privacy algorithm to be used in 2020. In SafeText, the user sets key parameters such as the total level of epsilon, relative error, levels of geography, and then SafeText produces an approximate tally of the data that can be produced. Essentially, what SafeText does is it answers the question, given specific parameter settings such as a total epsilon of 10, 4 geographic levels, and 2 iteration levels, what data could be published within an acceptable level of accuracy. This research enabled us to develop recommendations to determine SafeText parameter settings for acceptable statistics that will be used in the final algorithm to produce differentially private 2020 census detailed race, ethnicity, age, and sex data.
Thanks for that really important background, Rachel. It provides a lot of good context. And building upon what Rachel just discussed, to illustrate the race ethnicity categories and their particular scope related to detailed population group data tables, this bar chart shows a list of detailed population groups for the major categories and their population size estimates from 2010 census data and/or recent American Community Survey data. The purpose of the visual is to illustrate how the number of groups and how the size of these groups vary across the major categories. To illustrate the differences in size of the detailed groups across major categories, as we're advancing through the graphics, you can see how the color of the bars disappears as the threshold shown in the bottom left of the figure increases. From left to right, the bars show Hispanic groups in green, Asian groups in red, Black or African American groups in blue, Pacific Islander groups in yellow, Middle Eastern or North African groups in dark orange, and European groups in light orange. The visualization shows which groups would not receive data at a national level if certain thresholds are applied to the production of these statistics. The size and the number of detailed population groups varies across categories, as does the impact of applying different population size thresholds. By doing so with this visualization, we can see the impact of population thresholds on each of the categories. Again, the size and the number of detailed population groups varies, as does the impact of applying different population size thresholds. With the increasing threshold at the bottom left, we see the colors disappearing and understand the impact of population thresholds on each of the race ethnicity categories. Now, you may have noticed that in this figure, we do not include a list of American Indian tribes, Alaska Native villages, or Central and South American indigenous groups. This is purposeful because the list is simply too long to display in the same table format with the bar charts alongside the other race ethnicity categories. And this is an important reality for us to be conscious of and to factor in as we make decisions about decennial census data products. We know there are thousands of detailed tribes, villages, and indigenous groups for which the United States Decennial Census has historically produced data. A key dimension for American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages is their federally recognized status. To underscore this point, we created a table listing the detailed American Indian tribes and Alaska Native groups from the 2010 census and their population size. This graphic shown on the screen contextualizes the uniqueness of the AIN population and the size of tribes and villages in the United States. The data visualizations highlight federally recognized American Indian tribes on the left in dark purple and non-federally recognized American Indian tribes in white. Federally recognized Alaska Native villages are highlighted in dark purple on the right side, and non-federally recognized Alaska Native villages are shown in light purple. Establishing population thresholds, as you can see in the bottom corner of each graphic, at various levels disproportionately impacts AIN detailed groups. And we're seeing this as we explore the AIN data visualization. The corner of the graphic posts the population size threshold, and as we animate the graphics and raise the threshold level, we see the tribal names disappearing as the population threshold increases. Now, these groups are much smaller in size than comparable detailed groups in the white, Black, Hispanic, Asian, or Pacific Islander populations, and that's why we developed detailed data visualizations specifically for American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages to provide perspective on their number and their size. In the 2010 census, the Census Bureau produced population counts for all federally recognized tribes in the United States, as well as state-recognized tribes and Central and South American Indian indigenous groups, including those with population counts of less than 10, such as counts of 0 or 1 or 2. These data visualizations illustrate why the availability and the accuracy of detailed decennial census data is critical for all American Indian and Alaska Native tribes, regardless of population size. It also shows the adverse impact that population thresholds would have on producing these statistics for AIN communities. With our next graphic, we provide another perspective, and that's in previous censuses where a minimum threshold for populations was used to help protect privacy for these data. For example, in 2010, a threshold of 100 people was in place for producing detailed population counts. Our research pinpoints the impact that establishing thresholds would have on the different population groups and the statistics for federal programmatic and legislative uses. The table on this screen compares the number of detailed groups in each race ethnicity category at various population thresholds and enables us to understand the impact that establishing thresholds would have on different population groups, especially those for which we've historically tabulated in decennial census statistics. The table shows that the AIN population is immediately and disproportionately impacted with a threshold of 100 in place at the national level. Here, nearly 500 American Indian tribes, villages, and groups would not receive any data if we establish a threshold of 100 for decennial census data products. In previous decennial censuses, we created special AIN data products to provide a basic population count for all tribes, villages, and indigenous groups in the United States at the national, regional, division, and state geographic levels. We know these data are of critical importance to AIN tribes and villages, and not having these statistics would have real-world impacts on tribes and villages who rely on the data. This table also shows that the Pacific Islander population would be impacted with certain population thresholds in place. There may be only about 20 detailed NHPI groups, but half of these groups would not receive decennial census statistics with a threshold of 500 at the national level. While the Hispanic or Latino population also has about 20 detailed groups, this population is not as impacted until a threshold would reach over 20,000 at the national level. The Asian population, with about 24 detailed groups, has a relatively small impact, with 2 detailed groups not meeting a threshold of 100 and 4 detailed groups not meeting a threshold of 5,000. While only a handful of detailed Black or African American groups would not receive data with thresholds of 100 to 500, close to half of the groups may lose data with a threshold of 5,000 in place. And only 3 of the detailed white groups would not receive data with a threshold of 500, and about 15 with data thresholds of a level of 5,000 at the national level. So to develop our proposal for the 2020 census detailed DHC data products, we examined this interplay of different parameter settings for the algorithm to produce differentially private data from the 2020 census for detailed race and ethnicity groups and their sex and age characteristics. This research is specific to the population counts and the characteristics of sex and age for these groups. We're currently evaluating other statistics that are collected in the decennial census, such as tenure, household type, and family type characteristics with our expert colleagues in our areas of the Demographic Directorate. The Demographic Directorate's highest priority is to provide the most accurate statistics for critical data needs, protecting privacy, and especially knowing that these statistics are not available elsewhere. Our research goals were to explore how privacy and accuracy levels could be established, to produce statistics on our nation's myriad population groups, to find ways to allow for equity across all major race ethnicity categories, and to strive to provide the same amount or more data than provided from the 2010 census. So how do we find ways to balance privacy and accuracy for this proposal? We want you to take a look at the screen and imagine that you have a stereo system with different levers and different buttons to tune the music levels and get the best output of sound that you'd like to hear. That's effectively what we did with our research explorations and working with experts from Tumult Labs, with sound as the output being the balance of privacy and accuracy. The parameters that we could tune are shown here with the bright green levers and buttons on the left, and turning these buttons on or off or moving the levers up or down impacted whether various geographic levels, such as regions, divisions, states, places, or counties, would be included in the data, whether detailed population groups, such as German, Mexican, Navajo, Japanese, and others would be included, whether regional groupings, such as South Asian, European, or Middle Eastern or North African would be included, as well as helping us to understand the interplay of margins of error, relative error, and levels of epsilon. Our research team tried out a number of different ways to visualize these impacts, and we settled on this parameter tuner visualization of noise as the best way for us to understand how all the parameter settings interact. And we hope this helps you understand what this means for producing a balance of privacy and accuracy for detailed race and ethnicity group statistics in the decennial census.
Thanks, Nicholas. Now, let's return back to our 2020 census detailed DHC proposal and what tables we're proposing to include for the nation, states, counties, and for American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian areas. Again, this is the data product where data users will be able to get data on detailed race, ethnicity, and American Indian and Alaska Native groups, such as Mexican, Native Hawaiian, Lebanese, or the Blackfeet tribe. Our proposal for producing 2020 Census detailed race and ethnic group population counts and characteristics data focuses on tables that have been developed in an attempt to balance the programmatic, legal, and statistical needs of data users and stakeholders while protecting privacy. The next series of slides shows the 4 proposed detailed DHC tables for the 2020 census. Although the detailed DHC includes 4 tables that are iterated by detailed race, ethnicity, and AIN, tribes, and villages, and 8 complex person household join tables, our presentation today focuses on 2 of the 4 tables that are iterated by detailed race, ethnicity, and AIN, tribes, and villages, the total population and sex by selected age categories. We recognize that no data collection other than the decennial census has the power, breadth, and depth to collect and produce these statistics for all detailed racial and ethnic groups in the United States. And our highest priority is to provide the most accurate data possible for the critical statistics needed by small detailed population groups, such as American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages. And these data are not available anywhere else other than from the decennial census. The first table in the detailed DHC is table T1, which will show population counts for detailed race, ethnicity, and AIN groups, such as Peruvian, the Chickasaw Nation, Israeli, Haitian, Chamorro, and many others. The second table, table T2, will show sex by age statistics for detailed race, ethnicity, and AIN tribes and villages. The third table, T3, will show household and family statistics for detailed race, ethnicity, and AIN tribes and villages. And the fourth table, T4, will show tenure statistics like owners and renters for detailed race, ethnicity, and AIN tribes and villages. Now we're asking for your help as we continue to develop the detailed DHC. We'd like the public to review the proposed changes using our 2020 Census Data Products Planning Crosswalk available on census.gov and provide us with your feedback. The proposal for the 2020 Census Detailed Race and Ethnicity Data Products is very different from the data products on detailed race and ethnic groups that were available in the 2010 census.
Thanks again, Rachel. There were many 2010 tables and levels of geography that we did not receive use cases for, and therefore they're not included in this proposal. Our proposal for producing 2020 Census detailed race and ethnicity group population counts and their characteristic data focuses on tables that have been developed in an attempt to balance the programmatic, legal, and statistical needs of data users and stakeholders and protecting respondents' privacy. We're planning to produce data for more detailed race and ethnicity groups than ever before, but at many fewer geographic levels, as well as fewer and less detailed tables, while balancing accuracy and privacy. Our highest priority is to provide the most accurate data possible for the critical statistics needed by detailed population groups. We're requesting feedback from the public about how you use decennial census statistics on detailed race, ethnicity, American Indian, and Alaska Native populations, their characteristic statistics, and the levels of geography for these tabulations. Although we focused on 2 of the detailed iterated tables, we're following a similar process for the other 2 detailed iterated tables for household type, family type, and tenure. Our goal is to achieve a good balance of protecting individual privacy and providing the most accurate statistics possible to meet critical data needs and use cases. We're seeking feedback and guidance from data users on what types of demographic and housing characteristics are important to be shown for detailed race, ethnicity, and tribal populations, how the data are used, and at which specific geographic levels. To submit your feedback, please email 2020-census.gov and include 2020 Census Data Products in the subject line of your email. The deadline for providing your feedback is December 18th, 2021, and we encourage you to submit your feedback and your questions. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Nicholas and Rachel, and of course, a second thank you to Jason and Cynthia. I have seen you all and our other colleagues answering tons of questions in the Q&A, but there are so many more for us to tackle. So hopefully we'll be able to cover a little bit of it here. We'll get to what we can in written responses as well, but never hesitate to reach out to us at 2020-census.gov. If we don't get to your question today, or you just want more information on something we did answer, please feel free to reach out to us there. So I see a lot of types of questions in the Q&A. So I wonder if I can try to answer a few at once by grouping them a little bit. So first of all, we received a bunch of questions about release date, timeline, how long does production take? Cynthia, I wonder if you could just speak one more time to what our estimated timeline is, sort of at the end of the timeline window, and what people can expect for more clarification of that timeline going forward.
Great, thank you, Megan. Yeah, so the timeline that I've presented, and I just need to emphasize that we've been focusing primarily on the demonstration data production process. So we want to make sure we get the data in the format that is useful and that we can implement the DAS's top-down algorithm properly to produce fit-for-use data. So that has been the highlight and the focus of the last few months in our scheduling, and we simply don't have that end part of the schedule fleshed out as much as people would like. So I have to continue to stress that that production date that I say in the summer of 2022, again, that is on the production of the microdata. It does not entail the time that it takes to tabulate the data, review that data, and ensure that we're producing quality level data. So there is a question in there that asks, should we expect the data to be released in the summer of 2022? The answer, unfortunately, is no. However, I can't give you an estimated date because I don't want to mislead anyone. But as we continue to flesh out that schedule, we will provide more information, and you should expect to see that in the coming months because we're really at that time where we're working through the demonstration data because, again, we want to show that we can implement the top-down algorithm for the DHC. And I think we had another question in there about whether or not we would release the data all at once or on a flow. We're still trying to make those decisions, but right now we're thinking all at once just because it's been so long in between the release of the redistricting data and the DHC, and we feel like it would be best for the data user community to release it all at once. So that's our current plan right now.
That's really helpful, Cynthia. And I think part of what you said is really reflective of the goals we have of trying to make sure that we're getting really valuable feedback from our stakeholders that is helping to influence these decisions. It's hard to presuppose a timeline when we don't know like the quantity or extent of feedback we're going to get from stakeholders. So we're trying to leave some flexibility in there. And I know that that means that we don't have as solid of dates as people would love to have, but I know Cynthia's really been committed to making sure that we're reassessing and republishing that timeline as frequently as makes sense with the work that we're doing. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And Megan, one other thing, because we also got a question about the detailed DHC schedule as well. And, you know, we're working in parallel and it's the same resources, although we're using a different methodology to protect that data, but we're also still in the midst of the development and production schedule for the detailed DHC as well. And as soon as we have more information, we will share that.
Fantastic. I also saw in the Q&A really a lot of questions about particular levels of geography, when that data would be produced, so where the data is available. And I know, Alexandra, sorry to put you out on the spot, but you've been answering these questions right and left. Is there a magical place where people could go to learn more about the crosswalk and how to walk through it? I know I'm prompting you for something I know exists. Well, if Alexandra's audio isn't working, I'm sure Shelley will put this in the chat, but there's a wonderful webinar that Alexandra did that really walks through every piece of the crosswalk and shows you how to dig in and pull things out. So if you have specific questions on details of what's in DHC versus what's in DDHC, how to use the table shells that are also included in that crosswalk, et cetera, that information, that webinar might be helpful to you. I've noticed that we also, oh, Alexandra, great, please.
Yeah, sorry about that. So there'll be a link put in the chat about the 2020 Census Data Product Planning Crosswalk. There's a lot of tabs down here. For most of you, you can just go straight to the DHC Crosswalk tab. This is going to include a list of tables comparing the geography, availability, and content changes to that table compared back to 2010. So you can kind of filter through the columns to find what you're looking for. That second tab is going to be the actual table shell. So you can see line by line exactly what is in that table. We also had some questions about the detailed DHC. That's also in here too. So again, here you can see those 4 tables iterated by detailed race, ethnicity, and American Indian, Alaska Native. And then you see these 8 complex person household join tables. You move on to the next tab, and you actually can see those table shells right here.
Thank you so much. You've been so amazing about helping us all navigate that amazing and quite large document, so I really appreciate that. I also saw, by the way, while we're on this topic, a bunch of questions in the Q&A that were about data that isn't actually part of our 2020 data products. And that's because it's data that we really rely on other surveys for, like the American Community Survey. I don't want to get into that American Community Survey stuff today because we're focused today on the 2020 data products. But recently we've published a number of blogs, done webinars, and have a bunch of information online about that ACS data. So if you're looking for data on income, on average rental costs, that kind of thing, you want to go over to that ACS page and take a look there. I think the next big topic I saw a lot of questions in the Q&A on is questions about microdata. And I will say probably part of the reason that there are a lot of questions on the microdata piece is that we've touched on it here, but we haven't had a chance to really dig in with our audience on what microdata is, what the possibilities are for production and the like. Michael, is there anything that you could share today that would be helpful in folks thinking about that microdata? Or Matt Spence, I know you're on as well. Or should we save that for another webinar?
So I mean, we could spend an hour just talking about like the issue of the microdata here, but really simply, this is not a discussion with what Jason was discussing before is not about whether we'll produce a public use microdata file like the PUMs. That's a separate question. This is about how the disclosure avoidance is applied. So as was mentioned earlier, we have different algorithms that we're using to protect privacy in the different data products. The first one that many of you are familiar with is the top-down algorithm, which is the algorithm that we use to protect privacy in the redistricting data that we published back in August. And that algorithm operates by essentially creating privacy-protected microdata, so individual level records that have had privacy protections applied that then get tabulated into the data products that we release. And the top-down algorithm is what we're planning on using to produce the demographic and housing characteristics file. We have different algorithms that we're using to protect privacy for the detailed DHC. Now, the big difference between those is that the top-down algorithm, as I mentioned, generates privacy-protected microdata that are then tabulated. The algorithms that we're using for the detailed DHC produce privacy-protected tabulations directly. So it essentially skips that microdata step. Right now, the plan is to use the top-down algorithm to produce the DHC. So we go through that privacy-protected microdata step. But the question that was raised by our advisory committees and by others is, would there be accuracy gains? Would there be gains if we essentially took that microdata step out of production of the DHC and just did privacy protected tabulations directly? So that's the question. It's still being researched internally. No final decisions have been made, but as I said, the default and what we've been operating under is that the top-down algorithm would be used for the DHC and it would go through that privacy protected microdata step.
Great. And Michael, I know, reading between the lines a little bit in this Q&A on the questions on microdata. I think the underlying question that might be present for folks is how can they learn more about this so that they can give us feedback or give input at the appropriate point to the Census Bureau?
So a great resource for understanding kind of some of the impacts of the microdata requirement here would be, we did a webinar as part of this DAS series on how the top-down algorithm works. And a lot of this boils down to the post-processing that the algorithm does. So my first suggestion would be go check out our webinar. I think it was Differential Privacy 201, the top-down algorithm, I think was the title. And that goes into kind of what the implications of that microdata component are. I would also suggest checking out the Differential Privacy Handbook that we did in conjunction with the Population Reference Bureau, because that goes into a lot of the ins and outs of that post-processing step. So that's a great place. And if people have questions after they've read that and they want to learn more, just send those questions in to our email box, 2020-DAS@census.gov, and we're happy to have kind of further discussions.
Great, thank you so much. And speaking of feedback and comments, Jason, one other big theme I saw in this Q&A were questions about the feedback that we've received so far. And again, reading between the lines a little bit, I think people are curious about how will they know that their feedback was received and whether or not it's impacting the decisions that we're making about the disclosure avoidance system. How can they look at what their friends, colleagues, and folks outside the Census Bureau are thinking about these issues? Jason, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what we're thinking about making more of that feedback sort of available to the public.
Thank you, Megan, for giving me a chance to talk a little bit more about this. Really, data users have been great throughout this effort at providing us with uses of census data, both recently through this last solicitation and then earlier with the FRN, and really throughout this process, people have been really engaged with us. There was a question earlier about providing specific use cases, and as we go through these comments, we are looking through them, and in some cases we have what's a description of maybe a general use of the data, and we're exploring those descriptions a little bit more to kind of see what that leads to, like what tables are needed, exactly what detail within those tables are needed. And if we need to, we'll follow up with the people who provided those comments to get more information. Also, we're looking at connecting it with a larger federal program or state program that is behind that need for the data. I think what we're really seeing now, though, there are a number of tables that the uses and the need are very well understood, and we have many use cases that have been provided for those tables. However, there's a number of tables where they're both harder to protect because they reveal a lot about people who have responded, and the uses are a little less clear. I can give you an example, would be tables that provide counts of people in households of a certain age by the type of family in that household, repeated for race groups, right? So that's an example of a very complex table, and we're really looking hard to see where we have use cases that require that data at low levels of geography. So that's where we're kind of now, is looking at those use cases, the tables that are harder to protect. Where do we have use cases that support the need for those tables? But again, I'll say we've received a lot of comments, a lot of good uses, and we really do want to, as we work through this, be able to provide information to people who provided those comments and others about how we use those comments and share the comments that we receive. And there was a suggestion maybe to try and have another format for where we could do that prior to the release of the demonstration product. So maybe we could look into how we can make that possible. Again, thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's 4 o'clock. We do need to wrap up. I will say thank you to everyone who submitted questions through the Q&A. We got dozens of questions in there. I know we were only able to answer a fraction of those. If you continue to have questions, again, please send us an email, reach out to us one-on-one. we're really excited to answer your questions, and so I hope you give us the opportunity to do that. Just one final reminder that we saw a lot of questions in here about the detailed DHC geography thresholds and whether or not it was possible to publish different or additional data for detailed DHC. We're still taking feedback on that crosswalk about the detailed DHC, and we'd love to hear your feedback about topics, about tables, about lowest level of geography that's needed, about use cases. Please send that in to us. We're taking feedback on that through December 18th, so you've got a little more time. And thank you all so much for tuning in and listening today. We really, really appreciate it.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may disconnect at this time.